Are you ready for another Beach Boys party? A few weeks ago we talked about 60 years of the Beach Boys Party album. I didn't exactly word this correctly in the previous video, so I need to fix it now. Party itself is 60 years old in 2025, but I kept saying 50 because for Party's 50th anniversary we received Party Uncovered and Unplugged, removing some of those sort of banter, background noise trimmings and kind of reducing it to what it might have sounded like had it been done originally in studio in that form. And I kind of mixed this up in the previous video. So we're celebrating two things: 60 years of the Party LP and 10 years of Party Uncovered and Unplugged. In that last video I went over the track list and some of the basics for the original Party album, and then we went through track by track disc 1 of Party Uncovered and Unplugged, which had all kinds of fun surprises, clever banter, songs that didn't quite make the final cut, that sort of thing. Of course, these releases have popped up in other places too. We'll talk about Hawthorne, California in this video. The first time, way back in 2001, that some, not all, Party tracks were remixed and reconfigured for more organic sound. But I thought today, let's look at that second disc of Party Uncovered and Unplugged, and then I'll give you my final thoughts on the Beach Boys Party album. Please comment some of your favorites from Beach Boys Party below. Let me know how often you listen to this album and what your thoughts on it are, and let's wrap up our celebration of 60 years of Beach Boys Party. So now let's pick up where we left off with disc number 2, shall we? Last time we finished disc 1, which ends with a great acoustic, unplugged, kind of serio-comic take of California Girls. So let's look and see what all is on that second disc. There's a lot of fun stuff there too. We start off with She Belongs to Me and the Artist, which is also subtitled Laugh at Me. This is from, again, more of that second session from September the 8th, 1965. So they're spoofing Bob Dylan with her She Belongs to Me kind of stuff there, but the Beach Boys add some joke lyrics in, particularly a few jokes about race. She's an artist, she don't look black, that kind of thing. And it's really strange, not exactly the best there, and then it kind of devolves into the parody of Sonny Bono's Laugh at Me. This was a very recent song at the time. I think it was really Sonny's only big solo hit. However, the Beach Boys obviously didn't have a whole lot of respect for it, and their parodies of it are very broad, joking about, why do they care about your underarm hair? And jokes about right guard deodorant, things like that. It's definitely played for laughs. Not a huge fan of this one, kind of glad most of this stuff was trimmed. We follow that with a medley of Hang On Sloopy, You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin', and Twist and Shout. It's a spoof medley, again, done for laughs predominantly. Most of it is Hang On Sloopy, which surprisingly, the Beach Boys never actually did. Nor did they do Twist and Shout. Very strange. Songs you think the Beach Boys could have gotten some mileage out of, could have really done something with. There is a Beach Boys version of Made in California, but it's mostly a Brian solo from the mid-late 70s around the Beach Boys' Love You period. That was released on Made in California, and that's kind of a straight take of the song. This is just a little tiny piece of it as part of this kind of joke medley. It's interesting to hear them cover these songs that you think, again, that they would have done somewhere else or in their live set, but they don't do a whole lot with it. I think they could have done a pretty good cover of Hang On Sloopy, though, if they tried. We have a rough take of the Robins' Riot in Cell Block number 9. This is just kind of a practice take. Like on the last disc, there's usually a poor take, kind of a practice one, and there's some better ones that come a little bit later. Of course, Riot in Cell Block number 9 would later become the Beach Boys' Student Demonstration Time on the Surf's Up LP, and that was done in the live set too. If you have the Feel Flows box set, there's actually a live take from 1970 of the Beach Boys performing Riot in Cell Block number 9 and doing a very good job on it. It was definitely a big live sensation for them around the end of the decade. Here, it's just kind of, again, a practice take, and the group never ultimately ended up using it on this album, which is a shame, because I think it's actually quite good. They could have done an amazing job of it if they'd kind of tried. We have a Neil Sedaka spoof with The Diary. Do 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 do. do 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 do. But here the group goes kind of crazy and does those fake opera voices that we see in their live albums of the mid and late 1960s, the da, 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 kind of stuff, and definitely again played for laughs, something I'm kind of glad that they just skipped and didn't really use. And our final one from that September 8th session, I think we better do this next week. This one's mostly just kind of a piano riff of the Rolling Stones' I Can't Get No Satisfaction. A little bit of other just kind of piano jams and stuff. Doesn't really seem like anything of substance. No doubt this was maybe where one session ended, so another one could pick up later. And then we flip to September the 14th there. Let's Cook Now and Eat Later, which is just the Beach Boys and Chuck Britz kind of setting up the production, getting organized, that kind of thing. Nothing big there. We have takes of Tell Me Why and I Should Have Known Better. Tell Me Why is pretty good. The Beach Boys sound a little strained, a little worn out, but not a terrible take. I Should Have Known Better, kind of lethargic. Again, they're kind of practicing and toying with it still. Not quite where it needs to be yet. We have a spoken word selection, I should say, called What I Want to Do, which is like a Mountain of Love prep, getting the lyrics rehearsed, talking about the track list of the final album, most of which would be realized, of course, with the actual release. And then Are We Still in the Party? This one talks about Papa Ooh Mau Mau and Mountain of Love. They do kind of a medley rehearsal of them, which is kind of interesting. Papa Ooh Mau Mau, of course, the group would already have known, because they did that in their live set throughout the 1960s. And then there's also some jokes about like advertising things like different brands of soda. Get out the Cokes, get out the Tab, get out the Pepsi. Kind of reminds me of like the Who Sell Out, that kind of material in there. Nothing, again, of great substance. I don't doubt that fake advertisements probably would have been nixed by Capitol pretty quickly, but it's interesting to hear nonetheless. We have a pretty good take of Mountain of Love, followed by Where's Denny? That kind of thing. Interestingly, throughout this, there's some jokes about David Marks and Glenn Campbell not being there. Where's Glenn? Where's Dave? That kind of stuff. It's interesting, again, but nothing, of great interest. Following that up, we have a take of Devoted to You, which is kind of just early practice, kind of setting it up, that kind of thing. Of course, the Everly Brothers did Devoted to You, and that was something that Mike and Brian did together. Indeed, when it was released as a single, as the B-side to the Beach Boys' Getting Hungry, it was credited solely to Mike and Brian, and you might recall the album boasted that they are the Cleverly Brothers, that sort of thing. But here, this is just a very early kind of set-up practice take. Not a lot there. Followed by What Are You Doing Now? Which talks about Chuck Britz kind of, trying to break in and explain what needs to be recorded and trying to get everything prepared, that kind of stuff. Another take of You've Got to Hide Your Love Away by the Beatles. This time it's an instrumental. Following that up with Ticket to Ride, and someone, I think as Brian says, don't worry about mistakes, just keep playing through. We want it to be like a party, that sort of thing. So I don't doubt this kind of impromptu approach is something that Brian definitely embraced, and if there were mistakes, if there were things that didn't quite pan out, that was okay. They could still do something with those later. So very interesting stuff to hear Brian, who is known for being a perfectionist, not caring if one of his musicians messed up, or one of his brothers in some cases. So pretty cool stuff there. The Beach Boys never really sang Ticket to Ride. It seems like it would have been more of an instrumental if they kept it for the final album. Doesn't seem like it would have been a fully fleshed out, proper vocal track. A couple takes of Alley Oop, which aren't a whole lot different than the one used on the album. At least the second take isn't. Again, the first one kind of a practice. We have a quick setup dialogue, Tune It Like This, because they're preparing for There's No Other Like My Baby, which we get 2 takes of. The chatter kind of leads into the first take. Again, getting organized, getting ready, practicing the song, that kind of thing. And then an actual rehearsal take that Brian is directing and organizing and trying to make finalized. Interesting to see sometimes how the group slowly learned these covers and kind of arranged them in such a way that they could play them. We have a very kind of random chatter session called Do the Splits, and a couple takes of Devoted to You wrap up the September 14th sessions there. There's a flubbed take and then a more normal, prepared, organized one. And then we go to our final chunk of the album here, September the 15th sessions for the party stuff. You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, take 3, which feels a lot like their live performances of it at the time. In the mid-1960s, this became Dennis's song in the live performances. If you've listened to like the Japan album or the Michigan album from 1966, or I should say those releases, those live releases, archival stuff, it kind of feels like that. It's mostly serious, but there's a little bit of silliness too. Kind of minimalist in a way, definitely emphasizing Denny. We get I Get Around, which is just mostly chatter and trying to get kind of organized with it and deciding how they want to play it, that they aren't really going to do a real unplugged take of I Get Around. They're just going to play with it and mess with it and make it kind of silly, and that's fine, deciding sort of how they're going to do that. And it is still separated from Little Deuce Coupe, where they do this kind of fast, ridiculous take of Little Deuce Coupe. Steve Lewis noted to me that in the final album, when they're joined together, there's also a line from the song Poison Ivy in there. She comes on like a rose, that kind of thing, and it was all sort of played for laughs. At the end of the day, the only music of their own they used for the actual party album were I Get Around and Little Deuce Coupe combined into one sort of abridged parody medley. But it's interesting to note that they were indeed playing with both songs independently of each other. Then we have a take of Mountain of Love, which is kind of a silly take. It gets flubbed. Another take of Ticket to Ride, and another take of Riot in Cell Block number 9. Again, these are kind of rougher takes. They're just sort of practices. They mess up, they go for laughs, that kind of thing. We go back to the artist and Laugh at Me. There's a big intro and a lot of goofiness in there. The artist is, again, kind of spoofing Bob Dylan, and She Belongs to Me and that kind of stuff. And then the, of course, Sonny Bono parody comes back. You can tell they didn't like Laugh at Me very much. They weren't really going to do a whole lot with it for the final album. After that, we have One Kiss Led to Another by the Coasters. And I actually really like this take of One Kiss Led to Another, and another, and another. I think the Beach Boys do a good job with it, and if it were up to me, this would have been something that made the final cut for Party. This feels more organic, and being goofy and having kind of audience participation in it would work really well, I thought. So I was actually impressed, and along with their cover of Blowin' in the Wind, that acoustic California Girls, One Kiss Led to Another is one of the few Party uncovered and unplugged tracks that I revisit outside of the whole product, that sort of thing. And we end up in September 23rd, 1965, that last little bit again there. Couple takes of You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, one for practice, one more of a final take there. We have some dialogue about, you know, Chuck Britz keeps stopping them, and someone's like, what'd you stop us for, Chuck? Probably Brian. You know, keep going, keep going. You know, just get as much material as they can. We have a take of The Times They Are A-Changin', again, kind of a practice take. We get a quick medley of Heart and Soul and Long Tall Sally, and weirdly enough, Heart and Soul did actually make it into the final Beach Boys Party LP, used as a little bridge between The Times They Are A-Changin' and Barbara Ann, though it's not listed on the record or on the cover or anywhere else. It's just a quick instrumental riff of it on the piano. It's not anything, you know, the group doesn't really sing it or anything like that. But it's odd that it's here, but not acknowledged in any way. It seems to me like at one point they were considering doing a proper take of Heart and Soul, and that just didn't happen, or they didn't want to do it, something along those lines. But here it's mixed with Long Tall Sally, Have Some Fun Tonight, Little Richard classic. Again, another one of those songs you would think the Beach Boys would have done at some point. The Beatles, of course, had done it very successfully, but ultimately not. And there's not a lot of Long Tall Sally or a lot of Heart and Soul, so these must have been ideas that were scratched pretty quickly overall. We have a quick instrumental riff of The Boy from New York City, really nothing too interesting there. Of course, the Beach Boys song The Girl from New York City was written as an answer to that Ad-Lib's original song, but ultimately, you know, this particular take of the Beach Boys Ad-Lib's original, that didn't really seem to go much of anywhere. We have a cover of the Robins' Smokey Joe's Cafe, another one of my favorites, and another one I think would work really well on the finished Party album if they decide to keep it. Al Jardine has revisited Smokey Joe's Cafe. He did it with new lyrics for his solo EP, Islands in the Sun. But I really like the Beach Boys version here. I think Mike Love sells it. I think it would work really well on a fun party album. We have a dialogue piece called I Got One More, where Chuck Britz is talking about how there's a lot of vocal leakage on the songs and how what can they do about all this vocal leakage. There must have been some difficulties going on there in the production booth. And we wrap up with 3 takes of Barbara Ann. The final one is basically the same as the unplugged version that's used on the first disc of the album. The edit is slightly different. There's about 2 seconds, 3 seconds of timing difference, but for the most part it's the same thing. We saw some of these before in Hawthorne, California. Hawthorne, California back in 2001, the very first time we saw party tracks uncovered and unplugged, as they would say. And here they kind of take pieces and parts from different sessions and just mold them all together and make like a little highlights reel. So it's kind of nice to get 3, actual sessions, unedited, undoctored, unrearranged, that sort of thing. And that brings us to the big conclusion, and we can end just as the original Party album does, with all the Barbara Ann silliness, with Dean Torrance there too, of course. You got me rockin', you got me rollin', ho Barbara Ann, bow, 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 bow. Always good, though, to hear Dean there, and you can tell they're having a lot of fun with Barbara Ann. Of course, Liberty Records might not have been a big fan of Dean being there, but that doesn't matter. He still contributed to the album's, party albums, I should say, biggest legacy, Barbara Ann, which of course became a successful single. And when you see a party song on a compilation album, about 8 times out of 10 it's going to be Barbara Ann. Of course, Spirit of America also has Tell Me Why. One of the British best of records also has Mountain of Love. We've seen There's No Other Like My Baby pop up a few places, but overall, Barbara Ann is the one people remember from Beach Boys Party. So at the end of the day, what are my final thoughts on Beach Boys Party? It is fun, but it's something I have to be in just the right mood for to really and truly enjoy. Not a big fan that it's almost all covers of other artists' material, and that some of the covers are serious, and some are overtly silly, and some kind of ride the, median line between those two, like the Beatles covers. I can't always tell what's supposed to be homage and what's supposed to be parody. You can have a good time with Party, I guess, if you want something kind of silly. And I like that they tried a different sort of style, going unplugged and going, acoustic arrangements instead of the sort of wall of sound, Phil Spector-esque productions that we expect from the mid-1960s Beach Boys. Overall, though, it is a fun album, and if you like a lot of these songs, I think you'll enjoy the Beach Boys' unusual takes on them. And it's always fascinating to know that in the mid-1960s, when many artists, rock and pop artists, wanted to be taken more seriously, that the Beach Boys would do just an overt parody, something that was designed to be a frivolous throwaway and not really have any real depth to it. Of course, Barbara Ann's always a lot of fun. That's one of my students' favorite Beach Boys songs. Can't say I blame them. It's always a good time. And surprisingly, even though very little from Party is usually done live in a concert setting, I actually think a lot of these would translate to live performances pretty well. But at the end of the day, Party remains a very unique album and a lot of fun. And you know what, if you don't mind being silly, sometimes it's a good record to put on. And like any Beach Boys release, there's always something good to find in there, even if you're not a fan of the album as a whole. Please comment your thoughts on Beach Boys Party below. Have a nice Thanksgiving, and I do hope to see you as I review several different things for Christmas. So until then, my friends, go out there, learn the Hully Gully, and join a Beach Boys Party. And we'll see you next time. So long.